to share with you the underlying idea of this meeting. Meetings like this in 1650, in the 1800s, we have seen meetings like this every now and then. Whenever man wanted to disclose his concern for the burden of taxation. This is not a novel topic. This is a very particular topic. We are very familiar with it. It has been updated, so to speak, aggiornato, as the Italian say. We are going to provide you with my presentation. I can give you my email address if you want me to send you my presentation and or ask questions. We're talking about an objective, an aim, a goal, a purpose. I'm going to speak about a tool, an instrument. Now, here you are talking about what it should be, the rules, and I'm going to talk about what it is, not what it should be. And I'm going to mention the most important economic tool, the taxation structure of any country, the tax structure. The topic of this conference is housing, land, and social inclusion, a tax system to achieve it. This is wrong. There is no one single tax system to achieve it. This is not a national problem only, or a problem having national validity only. It has world validity. Man has been elaborating on this idea in the course of centuries. So, having said this, my approach starts with a question and the last paragraph, in what they have not foreseen, with analysis instruments that are not linked to social structures where crises erupt, and with a vision which is not historical. The Great Repression of the 1930s, the debt crisis of the 1980s, the subprime mortgage crisis in 2008, and the Eurozone crisis now are the most well-known crises over the last 8 years, claim to be explained by analysis focusing this issue on monetary and fiscal factors, but without going down deep into the issue, which is the reason why there is a recurrence of social conflicts emerging, always with one single result: concentration of political and economic power by dominant groups. The answer should be sought in the evolution of economic thought and the place that the state is given in order to arbitrate among social sectors according to the current political order or arrangement. In this line of ideas, I consider that this issue goes beyond the limits of the frontier of any country, in particular, in Argentina in this case, to become a universal problem. There have been thinkers who have demonstrated their concern for the way in which society was functioning, and they did not focus their interest in sectoral aspects, always in the field of economic issues. The first antecedent may be found in Xenophon, who lived between 430 and 354 before Christ, disciple of Socrates, who in paper known The Education of Syria, he mentioned the means to improve the rents of the state, highlighting the tax on land and the location of such land. He's following the thought of Greeks concerning factors of production, because they considered that land was the most important production factor. Later on, in the times of the Romans, 6th century before Christ, there are no thinkers that are interested in analyzing economic events up until the arrival of agrarians who start studying rural activity. But in relation to the ownership of land only, contributions come from law experts, Roman law experts, focusing interest in res publica, and show their concern concerning the administration of the state and taxation. The Roman doctrine did not define ownership as such, but they highlight their rights to use, dispose, and enjoy the fruits of any property. But they did not understand that these were absolute rights because they had limitations between the public and the private arena. The interpretations of the right to dispose of the ownership of land were not uniform. In extreme and absolute version, neoclassicism by the end of the 1900s. But the one accepting the limitation to the ownership right extended across Europe in English common law, Prussian Code 1794, Napoleonic Code 1804, German Code 1900s, among the most important ones. More recently, the Catholic Church doctrine has summarized its position in two very important phrases: the social function of property, and any property has a social mortgage thereon, which were mentioned. The first in the encyclical letter 23, I don't remember exactly what Pope, just a second. John Paul II, Puebla, Mexico, and the other one is John 23rd. We should highlight the difference between the thought of Aristotle and the Roman thought. The former limited the ownership right and individualism, which is the basis for medieval philosophy and canon law. Roman law was a justification for legal institutions, civil codes, among others, of capitalisms after mid-1900s. The decline of the Roman empires opened the doors to feudalism, which covers the period between 5th century up until the end of the 1800s, and propagates the present territories of France, Germany, Italy, England, Belgium, Spain, and Eastern Europe. It was a quasi-military regime of obedience to a lord within its territory of feud. The land originally owned by the king were distributed among the lords, of course, giving them usufruct for life in exchange for obligations, the ecclesiastical 10th contribution, and another one for the king. Time passed, and there was a need for resources. The king created a category of tax collectors to avoid the intervention of feudal lords, which did that on the basis of percentages in order to cover costs and risks. The medieval doctrines acted in parallel with feudalism, but moral was independent of economy, and therefore what really mattered the church was whether economic actions of individuals were fair or unfair. So they were teaching, for example, at the University of Glasgow, professors such as David Hume and Adam Smith, that from moral they are rationalizing the economic functioning of society. The eclipse that was occurring in feudalism is related to the great geographical discoveries and the religious reform in Europe. The concern by the nation state in the 1800s was very important. The different papers from this time belong to the field known as public finance. Authors interested in these topics belong to what we call cameralism. This name comes from Kammer, which means state treasury.
Studies included legal legislation, fiscal legislation, and tax administration. Universities outstanding in these studies were those of Vienna, Prague, Halle, Uppsala, Krakow, and Naples. A contribution without which this would not have been possible was given by the diffusion and the dissemination of the printing press. Only in Germany in the 17th century were 170 newspapers with economic news printed. Public finance gave rise to classical economy. This is something that few people know of. The precursor of the modern economy was called William Petty, who was born in 1623 and died in 1687. He authored the Treatise of Taxes and Contributions in 1662 and Political Arithmetic, among other works, in 1664. In my particular viewpoint, the analysis of taxation must start with the works of the person whom Marx said was truly the one who should have been considered the founder of economic science, and not Adam Smith. The outstanding principles in his treatise anticipate in over 100 years the works of Smith, and by 260 years the general theory of Keynes. If you read the treatise in 1662, he already spoke about the multiplier, which involved an increase in public expenditure 260 years before Keynes. The merits of the T lie in deducting the impacts that taxes that would finance public expenditure generated. Put in other words, the fiscal policy should be the cornerstone onto which the economy as a science would be built. Strangely enough, this is a chapter in the economy which is not taught or known by professional economists who engage in taxation. In the origins, it recognized, as Petty put it, three taxable bases: estate, income, and consumption. This has always been the case until the neoliberals came, who gave a relative importance to the first of these taxable bases, wealth. Though, like Walras put it, to implement the tax on land, there was the need of political power that economic ideas lack. From Petty onwards until 1860, production factors that gave rise to wealth were land, capital, and labor, which combined by the businessman gave rise to the flow of goods, which in turn originated income, which in turn would constitute the taxable base. The revenue obtained from the land was rent, that from capital interest, for labor salaries, and that of businessmen profit. If successful in the activity, taxes had to be fair, easy to manage, and should not be excessively cumbersome. The thinking of Petty is followed by that of physiocrats, which was based on the consideration that the work on the land was the only one capable of achieving positive results. The fact that it was considered that both industry and trade were barren did not mean they were useless. Therefore, the fruit of the land was the only one that had to pay taxes, and preferably a single one, as stated by the biggest exponent of these thinking school, Quesnay, who lived between 1694 and 1774, and who authored the economic table, when he put that the single tax would be charged on the net income derived by the product of the land. Physiocrats used as a motto for their political stance the expression laissez-faire, laissez-passer, and which was later picked up by ultra-liberalism. Economic power back then made it that in practice the proposal would be put forward with the argument that the tax on land had an impact on the price of foods. Quesnay was removed from office in the court just as the time when Adam Smith's works were published, which led to the disprestige of physiocrat ideas. From the appearance of the wealth of nations, the economy started